Hey folks, David Stewart here, comparing the ideal to the real. I don't know if you've ever heard of this idea before or heard it pointed out perhaps as a fallacy, but it's been on my mind tonight, so I wanted to make a video on it. And I want to talk about it in two capacities. The first one is in the political discourse sphere, debate, argumentation, and in the other side, I really want to talk about how it pertains to your individual life, how it pertains to your real life and your perception of yourself and others. So the fallacy of comparing the ideal to the real usually happens in the political sphere when you're trying to compare like two systems, like say capitalism and socialism, or maybe two forms of government. And the first one is reality, some version of reality, either the past or the present, and you're comparing it to an idealized, imagined state of a comparable system. So if you've ever heard somebody argue, hey, it's not real socialism, what they're basically saying is, please compare your reality to my imagination. Compare your actual iteration of capitalism with all the interference that exists there, the inequality that arises, the potential problems of winners and losers not being equal, and compare it to my imagination where everybody's equal, everybody works hard, everybody gets the resources they need, and things are distributed equitably by a benevolent government. The problem is, with like socialism, if you compare real world capitalism to the real world socialism, the iterations of both of those, it's a much different picture than if you're comparing the real to the ideal. So this is something that you can point out whenever somebody's comparing two things, one of which is reality-based, which means it's flawed, mostly because human beings are flawed. They create flawed institutions. They don't execute things perfectly. There are evil people in the world. You can't have a world free of naughty toddlers or any other kind of bad actors. And you compare it to an idealized version that somehow ignores those or mitigates those problems. And people can do it on the right too. Libertarians will constantly engage in this and imagine this utopia where we're all millionaires or something like that. But I see it a lot. It just happens a lot in the political sphere. So you can call somebody out for doing that. And it's an easy pitfall to fall into, because when we have this idea like, here's a system that works, here's policies that will work, sometimes those policies have never really been enacted. And so it's impossible to compare the real to the real. So you want to compare the real to the real if real is there. And if it's not there, you have to make some other reasonable case. Like if you want to change to a new policy that's never been enacted, you got to find some other thing in reality that you can refer to as like, well, when this similar thing was done, the similar result occurred. So it's very easy to fall into that particular trap, and it happens a whole lot. Here's how it pertains to your personal life. A lot of times people compare themselves, and I do this, I'm saying people, I really mean me. You compare yourself to the idealized potential self, meaning you compare what you're doing now, your efficiency with work, the quality of your work, the quality of your life, your ability to manage your health and things like that. You compare that to an idealized version of yourself, and of course it falls very short. So you can end up having an improperly framed reference of yourself. So it's a framing issue. If you're always comparing yourself to some idealized version of yourself, you're going to fall way short. And what is much better is to take your current self and compare it to your past self and see where your successes are and see if you failed, and come up with a plan to fix your failures. But almost always it's a rosier picture when you actually frame it as real, my real self to my real self in the past. So if you're trying to make the best version of yourself possible, that best version of yourself shouldn't be an ideal imagined state of yourself, but a realistic state based on where you are now and what you can achieve. And whatever you're doing, you want to be able to look back and make a valid comparison. Here's how I was before. Here's how I am now. I've improved. Things have gotten better. This happens a lot when people like lose weight. If you lose like 50, 60 pounds, that's a lot of weight, and you've improved your health a lot, but you don't look like a supermodel yet. You don't look like, you don't have abs showing, or you have loose hanging skin or something because you've lost a massive amount of weight. And so it's easy to get very discouraged or feel despair that it's impossible to reach, your potential self. That's not really the best way to think about it. This is part of the problem with goals. because if you set a goal for yourself that's, especially one that's not very tangible and you don't know whether it's actually achievable. So the best kind of goals to set are those goals that are like time bound, they're achievable, they're limited, they're measurable. Those are things that you can really attack as goals. What tends to not be good as goals is like, I want to look good, or I want to have abs, right? So having abs can be a goal, but there's a long process that gets there. And if you view your health journey as like a process, you're going to feel a lot better about, okay, I'm continuing to lose fat. I'm continuing to improve my strength. I'm continuing to improve my run time. I'm continuing to figure out what works in my diet. And so when you frame it that way, you find comparing real to real, it's a much more accurate version. And then when you are, if you've not improved, if you've backslid, you can see by how much. It's not backsliding away from an ideal state. It's backsliding away from a real state, which means it's much more limited and easier to understand how to correct. And this is a problem I notice a lot with artists. And I know there's a lot of artists that watch this particular channel. Is artists tend to imagine an idealized, hyper-successful, really good version of themselves. And then they're always comparing that, and they're always wondering why they can't achieve that, or they haven't achieved it. And then you have despair, you want to give up, it goes on and on and on. And what you need to look at is where you've been, where you are now, and where you want to go, especially the next step. And I know with music, in a lot of cases, it's like the years go by, and you're like, well, I haven't achieved this mega success I wanted. Does that mean I'm a failure? Or I haven't achieved this thing that I imagined I wanted to achieve. Does that mean I'm a failure at this? It's like, well, you need to look at where you've been and where you're going, and that's going to give you a much better frame of reference for what you're doing. You want to compare the real to the real. You don't want to compare yourself to like the idealized God mode version of yourself, where you're always going to be feeling lazy, and you're always going to be feeling like you haven't worked hard enough and you haven't had enough discipline. It's almost impossible to have nothing but ironclad discipline, beginning to end of every single day. The best you can do is the best you can do, and you always want to be improving as much as you can. But certainly you want to have a good frame of, here's where I was as a real person, here's where I am as a real person, here's the next place that I can be as a real person, and you won't fall into that continuing cycle of despair. So comparing the ideal to the real, it's something that you want to avoid, and in some cases you have to imagine the ideal because the ideal doesn't exist yet, and so you're trying to achieve something that hasn't ever been done or hasn't existed yet. And in those cases, there's nothing else to do for it except to try to figure out if that ideal is achievable based on other things that you may have observed in the past. But certainly for most things, real to real is what you want to do. So thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you want to see in the future. Of course, you could find all my books at dvspress.com and find them on Amazon, including the Needle Ash series, which is the Sears series, and I have more books planned that I'm hoping to release in the second half of the year. I've been actually very busy, although I haven't released a lot of books. I've been very busy writing books and revising books and working on maybe some potential nonfiction projects. So I'll keep you posted on those. If you're still interested in the books, make sure you're on my mailing list, dvspress.com/list, and get on there, and you can get the books for free and ahead of time as my thank you for communicating with me via email. So have a great one, and I'll see you next time.